All right, so chapter 12 and 13 of Zechariah, they showed us the acceptance of the people, how they took their Messiah, and the tribulation they've been being brought through. So this chapter is now going to focus on that final siege of Jerusalem, where the Antichrist is there, bringing all the armies of the world, and we're going to see what happens at the return of Christ. So the time of the Gentiles, the fullness of the Gentiles has come in, and they've been removed. So we're going to see this final week of Israel, Daniel's 70th week, as we call it, and the return of their Messiah. Now, how you understand this chapter determines how you view eschatology, how you understand end times prophecy, because it would be very hard to look at this in a amillennial view, in my opinion. Okay, so let's start with verse 1 about the coming day of the Lord. Excuse me. So in 14, verse 1 says, "Behold, the day of the Lord cometh, and thy spoil shall be divided in the midst of thee." So when I call something the day of the Lord, that's a day that belongs to the Lord, a day of judgment, a day of recompense. This is not a figurative day. This is an actual period of time where God is going to personally interact with his creation. It's a day that's all about him and his action on this world. The day of the Lord is mentioned everywhere in the Bible, and it always refers to this time of judgment. And I can give you all the references if you'd like. Now, it's interesting. If I told you about when your day started, I'd say, "Hey, well, how was your day today? Tell me about your day." You say, "Oh, well, I woke up around 7 o'clock. I did this, this, and that, had breakfast, had lunch, had dinner. And then when it got dark, I went home, watched some television, read a book, and then I went to bed." That wouldn't make sense, at least not in the ancient world, to a Hebrew mind. Because if you talk about how did your day start, it says, "Oh, well, we ate dinner and went to bed. And then the dawn came, the light rose, it got brighter and brighter," right? Because that's the Hebrew day. It starts at night and goes towards the day. So Jesus actually mentioned in John chapter 9, verse 4, says, "I must work the works of him that sent me while it is day. When the night cometh, then when no man can work. I must work the works of him that sent me while it is day. The night cometh when no man can work." So when Jesus is going to do the work, he's got to do his work while it's day, because the night's coming. And during the night, it's going to be a bad time. But what comes after the night? What comes after the darkness? The dawn, right? You got to get through the darkness to get to the dawn. So the tribulation is the darkness. What's the dawn? The reign of Christ, right? We're going to see that Jesus comes and Jesus will bring that light to the world. So how does this all come together? 14 verse 2 says, "I will gather all nations against Jerusalem to battle, and the city shall be taken, and the houses rifled, and the women ravished. The half the city shall go forth into captivity, and the residue of the people shall not be cut off from the city." They'll be imprisoned in their city. So God says, "I'm going to gather all the nations, and because of the judgment I'm going to pour out." His cup is full. His cup of wrath is full. They are ready to be poured out on all these people. The entire world will be united with one purpose, and that purpose is to wipe out Israel, because that's what would please the Antichrist. And who's the Antichrist serving? Satan himself. Why does he care to wipe out Israel? Because then he's broken God's prophecy. And if he can break God's prophecy about Israel, he might be able to break God's prophecy about him. He knows his time is short. He knows he's almost out of time to do it. That's what the Bible tells us. So this Antichrist, this false king, is going to unite all these armies to destroy Israel, and he's going to lead these armies of 10 nations or groups of nations. But 3 of them, we know from the book of Revelation, will be kind of forced to come along, or beaten into submission, as we call it, right? And they're going to invade Israel and try to destroy the people of God. Do you guys remember what the name of the valley is? Megiddo, right? Valley of Jezreel. So it's interesting because when Napoleon saw that, he thought if anyone wants to control the world, they have to control Israel. That was Napoleon's statement. His also statement was, if there ever is a final battle on earth, this is where it should be fought, seeing this valley. These are all quotes from Napoleon, right? And he wasn't particularly a spiritual man. So in 14 verse 3, He says, then shall the Lord go forth. When all these armies are around Israel, then shall the Lord go forth and fight against those nations as when he fought in the day of battle. So Jesus Christ arrives on the scene. He's riding his battle stallion, his horse. He's got his sword that proceeds out of his mouth, and he devastates the armies that are before him. He's not a stranger to battle. He knew what it was to fight the Egyptians, right? He fought the Egyptians. He knew what it was to fight the Canaanites. Who brought the walls of Jericho down? It wasn't the people. It was God, right? There's an entire book that we don't even have access to, but it's referenced in the Bible in Numbers 21:14. It says the wars of the Lord. We don't know what's in that book, right? But it'd be interesting to have. But there's all kinds. He will fight not only them, but he's going to fight once again, literally him against the world. You've heard it's me against the world. It's him against the world. And guess what? The world is hopelessly outmatched and outnumbered. Hopelessly. Not even a chance. Verse 4 says, and his feet shall stand in that day upon the Mount of Olives, which is before Jerusalem on the east, and the Mount of Olives shall cleave in the midst thereof, towards the east and towards the west, and there shall be a very great valley, and half of the mountain shall move towards the north, and half of it towards the south. So this spot where Jesus left the earth, where he ascended to heaven, will be the same spot which he returns. He left in peace. He returns in war. The earth was silent when he left. The mountain splits and cracks when he arrives. Everyone feels it. So I believe now that this is a literal representation of what will literally happen to the Mount of Olives. Now, back in, I believe, 1980s, there was a hotel, and I heard this story as well. There was a hotel, I think it was a Sheraton, that wanted to put their hotel on the Mount of Olives. So they have to do an environmental impact study to see what that does. And as they were doing it, they found they couldn't build there because there was a massive fault line running through the Mount of Olives.
East and west.
Exactly, east and west. So if they were to build it and there was an earthquake, well, it would split right through the mountain there. So they ended up not building there. So maybe Zechariah had access to that report. I don't know, but I don't think so, right? And so the point is, the Bible's very clear. This is a place that one day will split open and there'll be a massive valley. Interestingly, this is the same location where the glory of God left Israel. So in Ezekiel chapter 11, verse 22, says, then did the cherubim lift up their wings and the wheels beside them, and the glory of the God of Israel was over them above. And the glory of the Lord went up from the midst of the city and stood upon the mountain, which is on the east side of the city. That's the Mount of Olives, right? And then in 43 verse 2, it says, now this is when it's coming back. And behold, the glory of God of Israel came from the way of the east, and his voice was like the noise of many waters, and the earth shined with his glory. Do you know where else we hear someone with the voice of many waters? That's Jesus Christ from the book of Revelation, chapter 1, I believe, right? So we see when Jesus returns, he's going to come back from the east in the same spot. Verse 5 says, and you shall flee to the valley of the mountains. So the valley that was just created, you're going to run to it. You people of Israel, remember he said half of the people will still be in the city. There's no escape for them. They're going to be destroyed by the Antichrist. He says, you shall flee to the valley of the mountains, for the valley of the mountains shall reach unto Azal. Yea, you shall flee like as you fled from before the earthquake in the days of Uzziah, king of Judah, from the Lord, and the Lord my God shall come, and all the saints with thee. So Jesus will return and create an escape route for these trapped Israelites. They're all trapped under the Antichrist. Like, no, I'm going to make a passage that didn't exist before my arrival. I'm going to be the way, right? So he's going to open the passage. Now, remember, whenever Jesus warned Israel, he told them in Matthew 24, when you see the abomination of desolation, flee to the mountains. Go to Petra, go somewhere. We think Petra, but get out of here. Some of them didn't, and they're the ones suffering through this, right? The Jews require a sign. They had to see the mountains split. Do you remember how they got away from Pharaoh? How did they get away from Pharaoh? The sea split, right? The Red Sea split. Do you think just because there's no sea there, they have no way out? No. Do you think the mountains are any stronger than the sea when it comes to God? No, he splits the mountain too. Whatever he's got to do. So Jesus arrives with his saints and with the angels, the Bible tells us, throughout multiple places throughout the Bible. I give you all those references if you like.
Do you ever think about this, Paul?
Yes, sir.
As with the opening of the Red Sea, there was a wall to the north, a wall to the south, and it was cut right down the middle, and they fled from the west to the east.
Oh, same way. Yeah, same pattern. I mean, again, I've said this before, but when you really start researching the different patterns of the Bible, when you take everything down to the base story, you just get the same story over and over and over every single time. It's always the same story. And it's amazing how that all lines up because they're so different, all the stories, but take them down to their bare bones and you hear the same thing. So again, all of the saints and the angels are going to come with him. But wait a minute, Israel's the one being redeemed here, right? So who are the saints that are coming with him? Well, that'd be us. It says, we know from the book of Revelation that in order for all this to occur, the marriage of the bride has to have already occurred. So we read about the marriage in Revelation 19, and that's when we see Jesus returning with the bride, right? So it's interesting, who was it that is the bride? Well, they're the overcomers of the church. Well, who fits the criteria of the overcomers of the church? The 24 elders. Where do the 24 elders come on the scene? After the church in Revelation 2 and 3. Where do they disappear from the scene? Right before the bride arrives, and they're never mentioned again. They show up, then there's the bride. So they disappear and the bride shows up. So I believe those 24 elders are the church, are the bride of Christ. And the bride of Christ returns with Jesus at that time. Then we get to verse 6. It says, and it shall come to pass in that day that the light shall not be clear nor dark. So again, we read about in the book of Revelation, also in Matthew, where the sun will be darkened, the moon will not give its light whenever we come to this time of judgment. But it says, but it shall be one day, in verse 7, shall be known to the Lord, not day nor night, but it shall come to pass that at evening time it shall be light. So when it comes to God's direct intervention with the world, the laws of physics, the way things have always been, do not apply. He has the entire universe. He's not subject to the laws. He's the lawgiver. He's the one that tells gravity to bring you down. He's the one that tells the stars where to spin and the comets where to fly. He's the one in power. There was a time when unexplainably the world went dark for 3 hours. There was a time when that happened. When did that happen? At the crucifixion, right? Do you know that there's a time that people have seen Jesus glorified? And do you know what he did when he was glorified? He shone like the sun. His face was like the sun. So when Jesus is personally here, he is radiating light. Even in the evening, it will not be dark because it's not about the sun anymore. Evening means the sun has gone down, but it's not about the sun. He's not the source of light. Something way brighter than our sun has come to this earth. The light of the world has come to this earth. That's Jesus Christ. He's coming to bring eternal light now, spiritually for sure, and then also physically when he arrives. We read also in the book of Revelation, it says there's no need for the sun. When it comes to heaven, that's even beyond this, right? Because he will be our light. So we get to verse 8. It says, and it shall be in that day that the living waters shall go out from Jerusalem, half of them towards the former sea, and half towards the hinder sea. And in summer and in winter shall it be. So Israel, when Jesus arrives, will be full of life. Spiritual life through his fountain that he's given us through the cross, and it will flow freely from the King. People will live 1,000 years during the millennial reign. Their health will prosper. But physically, the physical world will also grow. Trees will grow, nature will grow, animals will thrive. Even the Dead Sea will be full of fish, right? I think I actually have, that's from Ezekiel chapter 4, Ezekiel 47, 1 through 11. Now, I don't know where the fountains come from. We find in Ezekiel that it's also coming from the temple. So some people believe that this water will just supernaturally pour out from a new fountain that Jesus makes. The other possibility is that when Jesus comes and splits the Mount of Olives, it actually releases a number of underground springs, including one from the temple. Because if you go to that part of the world, where I'm from, in Lebanon, every city, there's no rain most of the year, but every city has ample water. Where do they get it? You dig down and there's abundant fresh water under the surface of the earth. So if you were to break open a big portion of that, guess what? You'd have tremendous amounts of water released, and you'd have a fountain that could fill the seas. So this is a side note. The Dead Sea contains a whole lot of salt, right? As of right now, animals don't generally live there. There's a few weird bacteria they find there, but in general, there's no life in the Dead Sea, hence the name, the Dead Sea. But it also has a lot of sodium bromide and potash, okay? And potash, as everybody knows, is used to make gunpowder. I'm kidding, not everybody knows that. I have to look it up. But anyway, it's used to make gunpowder. And according to some estimates, there's enough potash there to supply the militaries of the world at their current rate of usage for over 3,000 years. All the militaries of all the world, okay? I wonder if, any foreign powers would look at that as a huge natural resource and might inspire them to come against Israel to secure the Dead Sea. And Israel has actually been extracting potash from it to fortify their own military. So some people believe that's one of the hooks used to draw Gog in, or what we believe to be modern day Russia, and to bring them in. And maybe it is, maybe it's not, I don't know. But it's interesting how the Dead Sea will one day flourish with life because of this new source of water going into it. So we see in verse 9, it says, and the Lord shall be king over all the earth. In that day, there shall be one Lord, and his name one. So God's going to be worshiped by all creation. And in verse 10, all the land shall be turned as a plain from Geba to Rimmon, south of Jerusalem, and it shall be lifted up and inhabited in her place. From Benjamin's gate unto the place of the first gate, unto the corner gate, from the tower of Hananiel unto the king's winepress. So this will be a literal earthly kingdom, defining its spans here. Why would I give the details of where the borders of the different parts of Jerusalem are going to be if it's all just a figurative place? He's given the details of the place. These locations were historically very prosperous and fruitful, and they will be once again. So, a lot of people said, we don't even know where the Tower of Hananiel is. This has got to be just some kind of figurative language, except they recently found the Tower of Hananiel. They now know where it is. And when I say recently, the last 40 years. So they found, we can actually draw a map that's described here. But again, some people say it's not to be taken literally. Another thing it talks about here is Jerusalem being lifted up. Some people, they look at this and they see that means Jerusalem will be rebuilt. Very possibly true. Other people look at it and say, well, whenever the Mount of Olives splits, where does all that land go? Physically, the city of Jerusalem may be literally lifted up. It's also possible. Other people look at it as maybe it's the new Jerusalem coming down from heaven. Also possible, okay? I'll let you know shortly which one it is. But anyways, so then we get to verse 11. He says, and men shall dwell in it, and there shall be no more utter destruction, but Jerusalem shall be safely inhabited. So not only do we have the borders of Jerusalem, we have the promise that it will dwell in safety. No more unclean spirits, no more war, no more hatred, no more enemies. They'll dwell safely. When the Messiah is king over the whole earth. What happens to those who stand against Jesus when he's reigning? By the way, this is clearly a millennial reign. If it's a heavenly reign, explain the next few verses. So let's see, verse 12 through 15. It says, and this shall be the plague wherewith the Lord will smite all the people that have fought against Jerusalem. This is not a good thing. Their flesh shall consume away while they stand upon their feet. Their eyes shall consume away in their holes, and their tongues shall consume away in their mouth. They're literally melting, okay? Then verse 13 says, it shall come to pass in that day that a great tumult from the Lord shall be among them, and they shall lay hold every one on the hand of his neighbor, and the hand shall rise up against the hand of his neighbor. And Judah also shall fight at Jerusalem, and the wealth of all the heathen round about shall be gathered together, gold and silver and apparel and in great abundance. And so shall be the plague of the horse, of the mule, of the camel, and of the ass, and of all the beasts that shall be in these tents as the plague. So this is pretty intense. All right. Listen to what he just said is going to happen. The armies who come against Jesus, who meet him in quote unquote battle, they're essentially facing a neutron bomb, a nuclear bomb here. Okay. That is the things that would describe what happens if I give you extreme radiation all at once, a huge blast of radiation. Everything soft tissue wise will just melt before your skeleton literally combusts, right? Some people say maybe it is a bomb, and maybe it is. I'm not saying it couldn't be. It could be. You know, some people believe that the Jewish scientists have actually improved on the nuclear bomb, right? Some people believe that. I don't know that. We can't. That's obviously something that would be top secret. But this is considered a Samson philosophy. And what does it mean to have a Samson philosophy? It says, fine, we're going to lose this war. Okay, we'll die, but we're going to take all of you with us, right? Maybe a bomb is dropped. You know, whenever you read in Ezekiel 39, it talks about a fire coming down from the sky, which certainly could fit into that. And also the fact that anyone who found the bones of somebody that was killed by this, they couldn't touch it. They had to go get people that were specially hired to go and remove the body, right? To remove the bodies because it would be somehow dangerous to touch. But it's also possible you're seeing something far more powerful than a neutron bomb. You're seeing how powerful the words of Christ are, right? You're seeing the power of God Almighty. Remember, there is no battle of Armageddon. People show up to go to battle, but they literally melt in the presence of Jesus Christ. There is no match. There is no, oh, Jesus is the good guy, Satan's the bad guy. No, Jesus is the guy. There is nothing else. He is God. There is no power of the entire universe combined that even compares to his pinky. There's no comparison to be made. It's all, he created the worlds by his word. And guess what he can destroy the world by? His word. But what about those who weren't at the battlefield? Well, he says, guess what? They're going to join battle with each other. Could you imagine now you've lost the majority of your army and these other armies? Well, let's fight against them. Are the other people, are you nuts? They end up fighting with each other, right? And destroying each other. So again, we see that Israel even joins with the battle. The survivors of Israel join with the battle, and maybe even the saints and the angels whenever we read about God's army in the book of Joel. So then we get from verse 16 through 19. And it shall come to pass. Again, if this isn't the millennial reign, what are these verses talking about? It is the millennial reign. That's why these make sense. Shall come to pass that everyone that is left of all the nations which came against Jerusalem shall even go up from year to year. So this is years later, to worship the King, the Lord of hosts, and to keep the Feast of Tabernacles. And it shall be that whoso will not come up of all the families of the earth unto Jerusalem to worship the King, the Lord of hosts, even upon them shall be no rain. And if the family of Egypt go not up and come not, that have no rain, there shall be the plague, wherewith the Lord will smite the heathen that come not up to keep the Feast of Tabernacles. This shall be the punishment of Egypt and the punishment of all nations that come not up to keep the Feast of Tabernacles. To those who decline to worship the King, who is reigning during the millennium, they're going to have no rain, zero rain, no prosperity, suffering, and during the reign of Christ. So their armies are gone. There's only Jesus who's ruling. So they continue to dwell. Again, these are not saved people. This is not heaven. These are not people who are saved. They're still alive under Jesus Christ, and they still are awaiting judgment day, which is after the millennial reign. So if they refuse to obey Christ, nature itself turns on them. So even now, notice how it mentions Egypt specifically. Why? Because Egypt historically has been able to do fine even without rain. They actually didn't depend on rain at all. They depended on the Nile. It is, oh, okay. Let me remind you what happened last time I needed to get your attention, Egypt. I'll bring the plagues back. There is no answer where you can say, well, I don't need to go and worship Christ, right? Yeah. There will be no doubt at that time that God reigns on earth. Why are you celebrating the Feast of Tabernacles of all the feasts to pick from? Why not the Passover? Right. It's being fulfilled while he's there.
comes to be fulfilled, huh?
Well, when God is dwelling with us, right? But the whole idea of the Feast of Tabernacles is that God took us through the wilderness wanderings, right? He dwelt with us when he brought us out of Egypt and through the desert. Well, God has brought these people, all these people, through the tribulation. That's a big deal. And they need to come and memorialize and remember what he did for them. Again, he is the ruler here. But don't ever forget.
He
Yes.
asks us, we take communion, do this remembrance of me.
Mhm. Remember what he's done for you. So again, now this passage is speaking to those during the tribulation. It's not necessarily talking to us right now. But notice something. Take the spiritual lesson here. When you don't worship God during the tribulation, you get no rain. You are unfruitful. Don't forget today, as Christians, take the time to worship God. Take the time to get to church, to preach, to sing, to praise his name, to thank him in prayer, or you too might run dry. And then the last couple of verses, it says, in that day, verse 20, shall there be upon the bells of the horses holiness unto the Lord, and the pots in the Lord's house shall be like the bowls before the altar. Yea, every pot in Jerusalem and Judah shall be holiness unto the Lord of hosts. All they that sacrifice shall come and take of them, and seed therein. In that day there shall be no more the Canaanite in the house of the Lord of hosts. So before the reign of Christ, the only place where God could even be in, where man could even somewhat relate to God, was in the tabernacle. And only the high priest could have that statement on his mitre, holiness to the Lord. But now, when Jesus reigns, everyone paraded in the streets, holiness to the Lord. Everyone, there is no secular, there is no spiritual. We are all before God. No more false faith. In that day, God will dwell with Israel. Every single person will not have to live in fear of their God. Remember, even the high priest was terrified to go in on the Day of Atonement because his life is on the line, right? No more enemies in Israel. No more Canaanite. No more Gentile. We are all grafted in for anyone who's accepted him. The invitation will be wide open. We know from Revelation, many will not accept, but many will. I believe billions and likely hundreds of billions. Matter of fact, I might even go on to say trillions will be saved. But there are many who will not. And we'll see. No more enemies, no spiritual, no secular. All in the presence of God. What a day that'll be. And that brings us to the end of Zechariah.